Early one morning, a husband and a wife were arguing over who should get out of the warm bed to make the coffee. And finally, the wife folded her arms and said, "You have to make the coffee. It's in the Bible." Well, the husband was a little bit shocked, said, "No, it's not. Show me." And pulling out her Bible, the wife opened it to one of the New Testament books towards the back and declared, "It says right here on the top of all these pages, Hebrews." Hebrews. I didn't expect it to be that funny. Maybe that hits a nerve with some of us in the morning, eh? And now we didn't hear about the letter to the Hebrews today, actually, but that theme of servanthood, of who makes the coffee, comes up in our gospel passage today. I'm going to take a little time to unpack it. The striking thing about Mark's gospel is the fast pace, right? In my Bible, our reading today, chapter 1, verses 29 on, is on only the second page. We haven't even turned a page yet. Already, Jesus has been baptized with God, announcing him as his beloved, the heavens torn apart. Jesus has spent 40 days in the wilderness being tempted by Satan and then served by angels. He's chosen his first disciples, the fishers Simon, Andrew, James, and John. He's taught at the synagogue where he healed a man possessed by a demon, and that's what we read last week. It's like a little action film where all the action happens before even the credits, the opening credits. And each of these moments has been a little epiphany, an aha moment, as we, the disciples and the crowds, all of us, learn more about Jesus and his divinity. And we also learn about what it means to follow him. So let's look at what we learn about Jesus in today's passage. So the disciples and Jesus are still in Capernaum. That very morning, Jesus was at the synagogue where he did that first miracle, healing a man possessed by demons. And Jesus and his disciples leave the synagogue and enter the house of Simon and Andrew. And we learn that Simon's mother-in-law is sick in bed with a fever. Now, in those times, a fever was understood as a demonic force, something that took hold of someone that might leave or might take them to the next realm. So we can see the parallel between the man possessed by the demon in the synagogue and the woman possessed by a fever. So what does Jesus do? Well, he goes straight to the mother-in-law. He doesn't wait. He treats her as his first priority. And he takes her by the hand. Now, we know from the first miracle that morning that Jesus can heal without touching. He doesn't have to touch her. Yet he takes this woman by the hand. He touches her. It's a real act of intimacy and caring. Also, he's touching a woman who's not related to her. Someone who has so little status, she's not even named in the gospel. And he touches someone who is sick and might have been considered unclean according to Jewish law. He breaks all kinds of social rules to take a sick woman by the hand. And by this, he's showing the disciples and us that his ministry is for everyone, and at that time, including women. And then he lifts her up. Now, the Greek word for lifted up is the same term used for Jesus' resurrection in chapter 16. He touches this woman and he resurrects her, brings her back to her life, brings her back to wholeness. And the fever leaves her. She's healed. She's healed by him coming to her, treating her as someone important, touching her, caring about her, lifting her up, raising her back to life. And as he does this, he reminds her that she is beloved, that she is known, that she matters, and that she belongs in this crowd of disciples who, as far as we can tell, are all men at this point. And what happens next? She begins to serve them. Now, with our modern sensibilities, we may be a little taken aback at first. Was she healed just to serve all these men who have invaded her house? Do they just need some coffee? Really? No, not at all. First of all, notice that Jesus, and no one commands her or even asks her to serve them. She gets up, she's healed, and she chooses to serve. And the Greek word serves that's used here is diakonia. The same word used earlier in the chapter, when the angels came to serve Jesus in the wilderness after his 40 words of temptation. She is serving the disciples as the angels served Jesus. And the same root, diakonisa, means a servant of the church. Simon's mother-in-law is the first deacon of the church. And she chooses to serve Jesus. She quietly shows the other disciples what it means to be a servant of Christ. As soon as she's touched by Jesus, she understands that following Jesus means a life of service. And this mother-in-law's work as the first deacon announces the gospel. The disciples don't know yet that Jesus came to serve and give his life for us all. Maybe she knows. So she serves Jesus and his disciples on this day, the Sabbath. And at sundown, when the Sabbath is over, the whole town gathers at the door for healing. Imagine a scene of noise and rejoicing and probably a little pushing and shoving as everyone wants to reach out to Jesus and be healed. It will be an exhausting evening for Jesus after a long day. Eventually, everyone sleeps, but Jesus rises early while it's still dark and goes to a deserted place to pray. I like to imagine him under a sky studded with stars, praying to his Father for what we don't know, for strength, guidance, thanksgiving, love, clarity. But as so often happens when Jesus withdraws to pray, when he returns, there is a change of plan. It's like he becomes clearer about his mission on earth each time he takes time aside to pray with the Father. And even though there are many, many people still waiting in Capernaum to be healed, he gathers up the disciples and moves on to the next community so he can proclaim the message there also. And he goes throughout Galilee, teaching and healing, even though, as far as the disciples are concerned, he hadn't finished his work in Capernaum. So, what does all this mean for us today? First and foremost, Jesus' love and healing is for all of us, men and women, everyone. His touch is for all of our lives, and he wants to have that intimate relationship with each of us. And that touch will bring us healing, sometimes physical healing, more often spiritual healing. He reaches out to touch us and lift us up and remind us that we are beloved, that we are known, that we matter and we belong. And his touch reminds us of the honored role we can have of servant, to serve Jesus. And we do that by serving Jesus in others. Maybe it's serving at the altar or the food bank, like many of you. By helping in big and small ways. Maybe it's helping someone with their bags at the grocery store. Maybe it's making the coffee for our beloved spouse. I'd like you to imagine for a minute a marriage where the husband and wife race to be the first to get up to serve the other. Where one of them wakes up early to have the joy of making the coffee for the other. What a world it would be if we all lived like that. God's kingdom come indeed. So from this passage, we learn that we can follow the mother-in-law's example and serve. We can focus our lives on serving Christ in all people like that first deacon. And there's a little more. The passage reminds us that even Jesus needed a pause from all the crowds and the healing and the serving. Throughout his ministry, he takes time out for prayer and for silence. He takes time out for worship. That morning, he was at the synagogue. And it reminds us that we too must take time to step away from all our servant duties, no matter how pressing, and spend some time in worship and time in a quiet place with God. Perhaps we need to pray for strength or guidance or clarity. It's often in the silence that we can hear God's call for the direction of our ministry. Do we keep doing what we're doing? Or is God calling us to do something else? Are we called to go to the neighboring town or the next task, even if perhaps our work is not finished? And knowing that wherever we serve, we are touched and lifted up by Jesus. Assured that whoever we are, whatever we do, we are beloved, we are known, we matter, we belong. Inspired by the Holy Spirit, touched and lifted up by Christ, called to serve the world God loves. Thanks be to God.